My boyfriend of 8 months brought me home for Thanksgiving, and his mother threw a glass of water in my face. Before I even got through the front door, I stood there in the doorway soaking wet, holding a pie I'd spent 3 hours baking that morning, completely frozen. Marcus was behind me. I heard him inhale sharply. His mother, this elegant woman in a cream blouse and pearl earrings, was already pulling back her hand and saying something I couldn't process because the shock had turned everything into static. Her exact words were, "You have some nerve showing up here." I thought she had the wrong person. That was my first instinct, that somehow, in the chaos of a big family Thanksgiving, she'd confused me with someone else. I even looked behind me like maybe there was another woman standing at the door who'd done something terrible to this family. There wasn't. It was just me. 27 years old, middle school art teacher, wearing a green dress I'd bought specifically because Marcus told me his mother loved that color. I had a sweet potato pie in my hands. I'd practiced saying the family's names all week so I wouldn't mess them up. None of that mattered because apparently his family had no idea I existed. Let me back up. Marcus and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party in March. He was the kind of man who actually listened when you talked, which sounds like a low bar, but I promise you it isn't. He remembered things. Small things. He remembered that I mentioned my grandmother taught me to make sweet potato pie, and 3 weeks later he brought me the exact same brand of spice she used because he'd found it at a market 2 towns over. I know how that sounds now. We became serious fast. By June, he was spending most nights at my apartment. By August, we were talking about what the next year looked like. He told me about his family constantly. His mother Diane, his older brother Darnell, his younger sister Kezia, who was finishing up nursing school, his dad Raymond, who coached youth football on weekends. He painted them like people I was going to love. He told them about me too. That's what I believed. He'd say things like, "My mom would love your cooking," or "Kezia would think that's hilarious," and it never once occurred to me to ask the obvious follow-up question, which was whether he'd actually said those things to them or whether they were just things he thought. Privately, while we were together, I assumed that was on me, but it was also on him, and I didn't understand the full weight of that until I was standing in his mother's foyer with water dripping off my chin. Marcus finally stepped in front of me and said, "Mama, stop, this is Jade. I told you about her." Diane looked at her son the way mothers look at their children when they're done extending charity. "You told me nothing," she said. "What I know is what Alicia told me." That name landed somewhere in my chest before I even knew why. Alicia. Marcus went very still. I turned to look at him, and his jaw was tight in a way I'd never seen before. Not guilty exactly. More like a man who'd been hoping 2 things would never end up in the same room and was now watching that hope collapse in real time. His sister Kezia appeared at the top of the stairs. She was younger than I expected, maybe 23, and she looked at me with this expression I couldn't quite read, not hostile, closer to stunned. She said, "Oh wow," under her breath, then pressed her lips together like she was stopping herself from saying more. His father Raymond came in from what I guessed was the kitchen, dish towel over his shoulder, and he stopped walking when he saw me. He didn't throw water. He just looked at Marcus with this slow, tired expression and said, "Son, just that one word." Marcus said, "Let me explain." Raymond said, "You should probably start with the part you left out." I said, "Who is Alicia?" Nobody answered me right away. Diane was still holding the empty glass. Marcus was looking at his father. Kezia had come down a few stairs and was watching the whole thing from the landing with her arms crossed. And I was still holding that sweet potato pie like an idiot because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Finally, Marcus said, "Can we go somewhere private and talk?" "We're talking right here," I said. I surprised myself with how steady my voice came out. Because inside I was shaking. Inside I already knew whatever came next was going to be bad. You know how you can feel a verdict before someone reads it out loud? It was like that. "Alicia is someone I dated," Marcus said carefully. "For 6 years," Kezia said from the stairs. Diane shot her a look. Kezia pressed her lips together again, but she didn't take its years. I did the math without meaning to. Marcus was 31, 6 years starting from when I wanted to ask. But I already felt the answer arriving before I asked the question. "We broke up," Marcus said. "It's over. She was here last weekend." His mother said flatly. The air went out of me. Not in a dramatic way, not like in movies where someone grabs a chair. It was quieter than that. It was the specific feeling of something you built carefully and trusted completely shifting under your feet, and you realize it was never as solid as you thought. I said, "She was here last weekend." Marcus turned to his mother like she'd done something wrong. That's not what it looked like. "She brought groceries," Diane said. "She had dinner with us. She sat in that chair," and here she pointed toward the dining room, "and talked about how things were getting better between the two of you." I looked at Marcus. He had the expression of a man with too many open tabs and not enough time to close them. "That's not true," he said. But it came out a half-second too slow, and we both knew it. Kezia came the rest of the way down the stairs. She stopped a few feet from me and said, quietly, like she was genuinely sorry, "We didn't know about you. She told my mom they were working things out. My mom's been expecting her today." I set the pie down on the nearest surface, which turned out to be a little decorative table by the door with a candle on it. My hands were shaking now, but I didn't try to hide it. "How long ago did you two break up?" I asked Marcus. He didn't answer fast enough. "Marcus." It's complicated, he said, and I know that phrase has been used so many times it barely means anything anymore, but I want you to understand that hearing it in that moment, in that foyer, with his mother still holding an empty glass and his sister looking at me like she wanted to apologize for her entire family, it landed like a slap. Complicated. 8 months I'd been with this man. 8 months of dinner and inside jokes and meeting his colleagues and talking about next year. I'd practiced his family's names. I'd made a pie from scratch. I need to use your bathroom, I said. Diane pointed down the hall without speaking. I walked to the bathroom, closed the door, put both hands on the sink, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. The water had dried on my face, but my mascara had run a little. I looked like someone in the middle of something they didn't see coming. Because I was. I fixed my makeup. I ran cold water over my wrists because someone told me once it helps when you're trying to keep yourself together, and I was trying very hard to keep myself together. And I thought about what I actually knew versus assumed. What I knew. Marcus had an ex of 6 years. His family didn't know I existed. She had dinner with them last weekend and told them they were reconciling. He used the word complicated when I asked a direct question. What I didn't know, everything else. When I came out of the bathroom, Marcus was waiting in the hallway. His family had disappeared, which I was grateful for. He said, "I'm sorry you found out like this." "I want to hear the actual truth," I said, "not the version that makes you look okay." He leaned against the wall and let out a long breath. And then, to his credit, or maybe just because there was nowhere left to hide, he told me Alicia and he had dated since they were both 24. She was the person his entire family had built a picture around. The daughter-in-law they assumed was coming. The woman his mother had introduced to her church friends. The person Kezia called when she needed advice. When they broke up 8 months ago, it had been ugly and mutual and final, at least on his end. 8 months ago, the same week we met. "Did you tell your family?" I asked. He was quiet. "Marcus, I told them we were taking space," he said. "Taking space is not broken up, I know. Your family has been waiting for you to get back together with her." He didn't deny it. "And she thinks you're still together," I said, even though it hurt to say it out loud. "We are not together," he said, and this part I actually believed. His voice went solid when he said it in a way the other parts hadn't. "I have not been with Alicia since the night we ended things." But he stopped. "I didn't handle telling my family correctly. I kept putting it off. And she calls my mom. They have a relationship. And I think she's been telling your family you're still together," I said. "I didn't know she was doing that until about a month ago," he said. "I should have corrected it immediately. I didn't, and I kept meaning to tell you, and I didn't do that either, and I'm standing here, understanding how bad this looks." I looked at him for a long moment. The thing was, I could see he was telling me the truth. Or at least the truth as he'd decided to finally tell it, and it was a mess. It was a genuinely human, cowardly, conflict-avoidant mess, and none of it was as simple as him being a liar or a cheat. It was more complicated than that, which somehow made it worse. "Because complicated doesn't clean up easy," I said. "I'm gonna go back in there." He blinked. "What?" "I'm not leaving," I said. "I came to meet your family. I made a pie. I practiced everyone's names. I'm going in there, and we are going to sit down, and you are going to tell them the truth. Today. Not next week. Not when it's convenient." Today, he stared at me. "Unless," I said, "you don't want to. And if you don't want to, then I'm going to walk out that front door, and you're not going to call me." I left him in the hallway. The living room was tense in the way rooms get when everyone in them has just been arguing and has agreed to pause when a stranger arrives. Diane was sitting in a high-backed chair by the window. Raymond was on the sofa. Kezia was on the floor with her back against the sofa, which I found oddly endearing. None of them looked hostile exactly. They looked like people waiting to see what happened next. I sat down in the chair that was clearly meant for a guest and folded my hands in my lap. "My name is Jade," I said. "I'm an art teacher. I've been seeing your son for 8 months. I did not know about Alicia until about 15 minutes ago, and I brought a sweet potato pie that I very much like someone to taste because I put a lot of effort into it." Then Raymond made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was in the same family. Diane said, "He didn't tell you." "No, ma'am, he did not." She looked toward the hallway, and her expression was a particular kind of tired that I think only mothers of adult sons understand. Marcus came in and stood at the entrance to the room. He looked at his family and said, "I have to tell you something, and I should have told you months ago." What followed was the most uncomfortable 20 minutes of my life, and I once accidentally walked into the wrong college lecture hall and sat through an entire 40-minute class on organic chemistry before I realized this was worse than that. Marcus laid it out. He and Alicia were over, had been over since March. He hadn't told his family because he'd been conflict-averse, and he'd known it would upset his mother, and he'd kept thinking Alicia would stop calling, and the situation would dissolve on its own, which he now understood was a spectacular failure of judgment. Diane did not take it well, not because she was angry at me, more because she'd been building expectations around something for years, and now she was watching them come apart in her own living room on Thanksgiving. She'd loved Alicia. She'd imagined a particular future. And the grief of that is real, even when the person causing it is sitting in your living room trying to apologize. She said to Marcus, "You let me look like a fool." He said, "I know. She was in this house last week telling me." "I know, Mama." "And you knew she was coming here, and you said nothing." He didn't have an answer for that one. Raymond said, "Did you know she was coming today?" Marcus was quiet for a second too long. I looked at him. He said, I thought she might not. The room temperature dropped. I said, what does that mean? He said, she called me Wednesday night. I told her not to come. She said she understood. You thought she wasn't coming, I said slowly, but you brought me anyway. I wanted you to meet my family. And if she showed up? He didn't answer. Kezia said quietly from the floor, she's on her way. She texted me an hour ago saying she was bringing rolls. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. I know, you're thinking I should have left. Every sensible part of me understood that the correct move was to gather my pie, thank his parents politely, and exit this situation before it became something I couldn't walk back from. But there was another part of me, the stubborn part that does not like being wet and humiliated in someone's foyer, that wanted to stay, so I stayed. Alicia was beautiful in the specific way of someone who has always known they were beautiful and has built a comfortable life inside that knowledge. She was about my height, natural hair pinned up, holding a basket of dinner rolls covered in a checkered cloth. She walked in like someone who belonged there, which I suppose from her perspective she did. She saw me and stopped. She looked at Marcus. He said, Ali, who is this? She said, and I thought, we are about to do this again, this exact conversation, but from the other side. Diane stood up from her chair and I watched her make a decision in real time. Something shifted in her face. Whatever she'd hoped might happen today, she'd put it down. Alicia, she said gently, come sit down, Marcus has something to say. Alicia looked at me for a long moment before she moved. Her expression was doing something complicated. I recognized it because I'd been wearing the same look 20 minutes ago. It was the look of someone who has just understood they've been navigating a map that someone else drew wrong on purpose. She sat across from me. Marcus said his piece again. Shorter this time, more direct. Over 8 months, he should have said so clearly he was sorry. What happened next was not what I expected. Alicia didn't cry. She didn't throw anything, though I will admit I was watching her hands. She looked at him for a long time and then she said very quietly, I knew. Marcus blinked. What? I knew you weren't coming back, she said. I think I've known since April. But your mother kept calling and I didn't know how to tell her because I love this family and I didn't want to lose them too, she exhaled. So I let it go on longer than it should have. That's on me as much as it's on you. She looked at me then, direct, steady. No apology, but no hostility either. She said, I'm sorry she threw water on you. You didn't deserve that. I said, the dress is fine. She almost smiled. The green's a good color. Diane made a sound that was hard to categorize. Alicia put the rolls on the table and picked up her bag. She said goodbye to Raymond, hugged Kezia for a long moment while Kezia whispered something in her ear, and then she looked at Diane. Something passed between them that I wasn't part of and didn't try to interpret. Diane took her hand briefly, then Alicia left. The door closed. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Raymond stood up, looked at his son with an expression that promised a much longer conversation later, and said, I'm going to get the turkey. Kezia looked up at me from the floor and said, the pie smells amazing for what it's worth. Sweet potato. I said, my grandmother's recipe. Can you cook anything else or is it just pie? I make a very good jollof rice. Kezia pointed at me. You're staying. Dinner was awkward in the specific way of meals where everyone is pretending the hour before didn't happen. Diane was quiet. Raymond made up for it by being the kind of man who fills silence with steady low-key warmth, asking me questions about teaching, about my family, about how I'd gotten into art. Kezia kept stealing bites of pie before it was officially time for dessert and then denying it while her mouth was still full. Marcus sat beside me and I let him, but I didn't let him hold my hand. That part wasn't resolved. I want to be honest about that. What he'd done wasn't nothing. The cowardice of it, the months of letting me build something while knowing there was a whole architecture of his life that I'd never seen that was real, and it was going to need a real conversation that couldn't happen at a family dinner. On the drive home, he said, I understand if you're done with me. I looked out the window at the highway and thought about it honestly. About the water and the shock in Alicia's face and the way he'd said maybe she wouldn't come and what that meant about who he was under pressure. I also thought about the way he looked when he finally told the truth, how he didn't hedge once he started. How he'd stood in that room and let his mother be upset with him without trying to redirect it onto me. I said, I need a week. He said, okay. And you need to call Alicia and have an actual conversation with her, not to fix anything, just to properly close it. She deserves that and you owe it to her. He said, I know. And you need to talk to your mother. I know. And next time something complicated is happening in your life, I said, turning to look at him, I need to be someone you tell, not someone you keep in a separate room while you figure it out. He was quiet for a moment and then he said, you stayed. I stayed. Why? I thought about it, about the pie, about the green dress, about practicing in my bathroom mirror on a Wednesday night because I'd wanted his family to like me before I even met them, about the way Kezia had said you're staying like it was already decided. Because I wanted to see who you were when it got hard, I said. That's the only way you ever actually know someone. He didn't say anything after that, but somewhere on the interstate he reached over and put his hand on the console between us, palm up. I didn't take it that night, but I didn't move it either. I called my best friend Renee when I got home and told her the whole thing from the beginning. She listened all the way through without interrupting, which took serious self-control on her part because she had opinions. I could hear them building up behind her teeth. When I finished, she said, "The mama threw water on you, she did, and you stayed for dinner." I did, Jade, I know. She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "How was the pie?" I laughed for the first time all day, really laughed. "Kezzy had 3 pieces," I said. 3 days later, Marcus called Alicia. He told me about it the same evening, unprompted, which mattered to me. He said it was a hard conversation, that she'd cried a little, he'd cried a little, that they'd talked for almost 2 hours about what the relationship had actually been and what it hadn't been, and how they'd both been holding on to something that had been over before it technically ended. He said she was going to be okay. I believed him. He also told me that Diane had called him the morning after Thanksgiving. Not to apologize exactly, because Diane was not built for that kind of directness, but to tell him that she'd been wrong to make a decision about someone she'd never met and that she'd like to try again. "She wants to know if you'd come for Sunday dinner sometime," he said. I said I'd think about it. I did go. 3 weeks later, Sunday dinner, just family, no ambush. Diane made her own sweet potato pie, which I think was a message of some kind, and I ate 2 pieces and told her it was the best I'd had since my grandmother's, which was almost true and was the right thing to say. She smiled at me properly for the first time. After dinner, while Marcus and Raymond were doing dishes and Kezia was showing me photos on her phone of her nursing school cohort, Diane came and sat beside me on the sofa. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I didn't ask him enough questions. That's the truth of it. I assumed because I wanted things to be a certain way." I said I made the same mistake. She looked at me sideways. "I assumed he told you," I said, "never asked." I was so focused on making a good impression that I didn't ask the basic question. She considered this. Then she said, "The green was a good choice. He told me you'd like it. He was right about something at least. It wasn't a warm, tearful reconciliation moment. It was 2 women sitting on a sofa acknowledging they'd both been navigating something with incomplete information, which is quieter than a hug, but in some ways more honest. I'm still with Marcus. I want to say that clearly because I think people expect the ending to go a different way. But it's been 7 months since the Thanksgiving, and we are still together, and things are different in the way that things can only get different after something breaks and gets rebuilt a little more carefully. He tells me things now. Not everything immediately, he's still human, but he doesn't let anything collect in a separate room anymore. When something is complicated, he says so upfront instead of hoping it'll resolve before it becomes my problem too. I'm still learning him, that's the honest version. Kezia texts me occasionally, usually memes or something ridiculous that happened at her hospital, and I text back. That part happened naturally, which I think is the only way it could have. Last month, Diane asked me to send her my pie recipe. I almost didn't, I'm not going to lie to you. It's my grandmother's recipe, and it's not something I give out casually. But I thought about that first night, about the green dress and the doorstep, and the choice she made when Alicia came through the door. The way she stood up from that chair and said, "Come sit down and let her son tell the truth." Even though it cost her something, I sent it. All the measurements, the specific spice, everything. She made it for Christmas, and she sent me a photo of the dish, already half empty, with a single text underneath. She got it right.